Alright, let's talk about postfix. Here, line number 7, you're returning a constant object. And also notice that you actually pass in a value of integer type. However, you will never use it. Well, why do you pass in a postfix operator takes a value of type int, but the prefix doesn't? Well, that's just so they can differentiate between postfix and prefix. That's the only way to actually tell the difference between a postscript operator and a prefix operator within the implementation details. So when you're implementing postfix, you want to pass in an int. Remember, I don't have any name for that int. I didn't name the parameter. Oh, it doesn't matter because you're not going to be using it. You basically actually better off not naming it because you're not going to be using it, and you can avoid. Sometimes you'll get a warning from the compiler saying a variable was declared but not used. So just don't declare a name for it. Okay, so that's line number 7. Line number 9, that's your temporary object that you're declaring to hold the old value. Line number 10, you're gonna basically dereference that this pointer, which is pointing to the current object that called it, and it's going to increment the value. And look at the return value. However, you incremented the value already, but you're going to return the old value, which that's what you want, because PostScript means you have I equals to 0, and you do I plus plus, and let's say you're passing that into a function. You still want to pass in the value of 0, but you want to increment I when you're out of the function. The I value of I would be incremented. So in other words, whenever you say use PostScript, you actually get the old value, but if you access it again, so you're going to access the memory again, it'll always give you the new value. That's all it means. So I guess, are we done with this topic? Well, not yet. Let's look at something else. Let's look at why we do what we do. Why do we return a const? Why we can do special things like I plus 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 plus. Alright, let's look at the special case and see why const return is being made here. Actually, let's start with this special case. You have int I equals to 0, and you got I plus 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 plus. It won't work. It'll actually compile error. That's because you're actually returning a const object. And if you notice, your operator plus plus is a non-const member function. If you don't know what that is, don't worry about it for now. Just remember that you're returning a const value, and the operator plus plus can't be called by a const value. Right? That's why you cannot chain your postfix. Alright, so that's the simple answer. Because you're not returning references, you're actually returning a new const object, you can't chain it. Right? That's why it fails. Now let's say you said, hey, wait, I'm not happy with that. I want to be able to chain it. I like what I did with plus 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 I. I like the I program. I wanted this to work for postfix also. So you ended up, since you are pretty much free to write your own operator, you can actually go ahead and re-implement it to actually make it non-const, so you can actually do the chain and make it compile. Alright, and we'll look at what happens if you actually don't return a const object, and that's actually part of our long answer, and that's coming up next. Here we are. We changed our definition, we changed the prototype. We're going to try to see if we can make it work. Well, it'll compile, but it still won't work. Why is that? Well, let's look at it. Let's say, for example, we have int I equals to 0, and we got I plus 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 plus, making this compile. It'll compile, but is the result 2 or something else? Long answer, here we go. I plus 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 is actually same as I calling the operator plus plus. There's you passing your 0, that's how it's implemented in the compiler. So that's how compiler interprets it. So looking at that, so it's gonna do I, it's gonna call plus plus operator with the 0 passed in, and then it's gonna chain it because that's what you asked it to do, and call another operator, recall the operator plus plus, passing in 0 because it's a postscript. Okay, so what that basically comes out to is the second call, this call, is actually being applied to the temporary objects that gets returned by the first call. Now you might say, well, why do you want to return a temporary object? Why don't you return a reference? Well, then you're stepping into another domain because you actually, if you remember in the implementation, you defined a temporary object within the body to return the old value. So you can't return a reference to a locally scoped temporary object. Don't want to do that because as soon as you exit the function, the temporary objects will kind of gets lost because the destructors are called, and bad things happen if you return a reference to a local variable. So you can't do that. Right? So the bottom line is, because you're returning an object, not a reference, it's actually not going to increment I. It's actually going to try to increment that temporary value, that it created, and this leads to incorrect answers. So that's not what you want. So even if you are able to make it work, if you make it work in a sense that make it compile, it's not going to work the way you want it to work. So it still will increment only once. The function will be called twice, but the second time it's called, it's going to be called on a temporary object. All right, so that won't work. That's why, just to get rid of the confusion, just force it to return a const. So when you return a const, it's going to give you a compiler, and you'll catch it during compile time, because then you're going to have spent some time doing figuring out why the heck it's not giving the right answer. So might as well just make it not work. All right. Okay, here at the bottom you notice is the word of wisdom. It says, when in doubt, do what the ints do. What that basically means is this is how int implementation of operator plus plus looks like. If you go back a few slides, I showed you the whole implementation. That's how int implements the integer, postscript, postfix, and prefix. And so you should try to follow that same model. I'm just giving you an explanation of what that model does and how it's actually doing what it's doing internally. Alright, let's look at one last case. A case of I equals to I plus plus. Usually you won't see this anywhere because people who actually use postscript, prescript will stay away from this kind of stuff. It looks scary. We'll just kind of talk about what it does. So let's say you have I equals to 0, you got I equals to I plus plus. The question is asked what the value of I would be. Well, look back into the implementation of operator plus plus for the postfix. You'll notice that first thing it's going to do, it's going to store the value of I, the current value of I, which is actually a 0, and then it's actually going to increment the value in the memory. That's where you dereference this pointer and you increment it, and that's actually going to happen in the memory. But when the function returns, it's going to return a value of 0 because that's the old value before the increment was happened. And when it comes out of the I plus plus operator, the next operator it's going to call is the equal operator. The right hand side value of the equal operator is 0, so it's going to take that value and try to assign it back to I. Well, I in memory is currently set at 1 from calling the operator I++. However, the next operator is operator equal, which takes a value of 0 and it's going to reassign that value back to 0. So the increment does happen. So the value of I does increment to 1, however it gets reset back to 0, all the old value, whatever it was, because of the return value that you got from I++. So that's all I have to say on that. The word efficiency is basically, if you think about it, the PostScript actually creates a temporary object to store, first of all, to the old value, and also creates a temporary object for its return value. Okay, that's two temporary objects that it creates, one to store and one to return. And also, the prefix operator does not have any such temporary values. So, if you are in a situation where you don't have to use PostScript, I would recommend using prescripts all the time. So make a habit of using prefix just for the efficiency's sake. And some cases where you actually, like, you want to call a function where you actually want to pass the old value, but you want to increment the value by 1. In that special cases, or maybe some other special cases that you can probably come up with, where you have to use PostScript, you can go ahead and use it, but in a single line statement, such as using within a for loop, or just on a single line where you just kind of increment by 1, make a habit of using a prefix, as a actually more efficient way of incrementing, as we talked about in the lecture. So if you still have any questions about it, you can obviously write to the post. I'll be making a lot more other videos, just going into the details of how things are done and why they are done. And so stay tuned, and there will be more videos coming up. Thank you. Bye.